Welcome back to Within Reason with Bob Kerrigan and Bill Rankin. Bob is away. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Jocelyn Evans, who is the chair of the Department of Government at UWF. And what is your PhD in? You know a lot about government.
It's in political science, and my specialization is the American Congress.
Oh, cool. And if you haven't been with us for the whole show, you won't know this, and I want you to know it. Dr. Evans has written a book about, I guess it's about the changes to our government brought by 9/11.
Terrorism, absolutely.
And terrorism. What's the title of the book again?
One Nation Under Siege, Congress, Terrorism, and the Fate of American Democracy. And
we've talked about some of the topics, and it is really interesting because it's not, you know, a lot of the popular books like Obama's an amateur and all of that stuff. I mean, they're, you know, kind of sensational, but this gives you the background, for example, of all the assaults on Congress, all of the things that happened. It's a little more scholarly and thus a little more useful than which is maybe why it's not on the bestseller list. I don't know.
Well, thank you, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, well. But you brought this term up, and we're not going to get to a quarter of the topics that we started with. What is populism?
Populism is an ideology that really is focused on power to the average person. So it can be a reaction to power held by elites for any reason. That's why people will refer to the populism of the 1890s, the populism of the 19-teens. So I can stop and talk about any particular movement, but that's what unifies populist movements.
Is this true? My take on it is that it's where a politician stands up and says, a chicken in every pot. If we just took all this rich stuff that all the rich guys have, everybody would be okay. I think that was kind of Huey Long's approach to getting himself elected. What do you think about it?
It's tricky because it isn't the same as socialism or communism. It's not necessarily stronger state control.
Right.
But it does have to do with the average working man.
Right. Right. And doesn't it also have to do with, well, you're not as well off as you ought to be because they're getting more than their share.
Right.
And Obama's always talking about the millionaires and the billionaires and showering tax breaks on the millionaires, which to my view is total nonsense if you know who pays the taxes in this country. Really.
It is demonizing the upper echelon.
Right.
Whether that's military, business, political. Yeah.
And in some sense, now, there are fat cats who use their fat cat status to stay even fatter. But, I mean, there is a strain in this of demonizing achievement. You didn't build that. Really? I thought I did.
Yeah, and I think that it really helps to go back and look at previous movements to understand the discontent. So the 1890s, that's a blank space for most of my students. That doesn't bring up anything, the 1890s. But the agrarian movement was really strong. Farmers were united against centralized business. It was a time of monopolies.
Right.
And so you get the antitrust.
And you've always had farmers versus railroads. I mean,
right. So we can kind of think in terms of, you know, what were the farmers against? What were the progressives really fighting? They were fighting corruption in government that favored business.
Right. So when we got an antitrust act.
Right. So monopolies. So can we see similar monopolies today? Absolutely. If we look at IBM, if we look at, you know, Google, if we look at Facebook. I think people are seeing these.
But they're subject to antitrust laws, and and it's not like the days of syndicates and being able to tie everything up. What do you think about? Putting you on the spot about something we haven't talked about. What do you think about the populist appeal? What do you think about the greedy rich and the real problem in this country is the rich are too greedy and they're not paying their fair share?
As long as
is there truth to it?
Sure, as long as we have income disparity.
Yeah.
There will always be a majority who have less.
Of course.
And they will always be united by a candidate who has a populist appeal. I think what we see right now is that income disparity has increased.
Yes.
And that happened in the 1920s as well. So there's certain periods where that income disparity, the Gini coefficient, right?
Yeah.
That disparity grows, and people feel that difference more.
So just the fact of income disparity, which actually nobody would necessarily know about, because generally speaking, I mean, we've got a government-established poverty line, but it doesn't mean what it used to mean, say, 80 years ago.
That's right.
I mean, when people just didn't have enough food, we've got the fattest poor people in the world, not that they're not poor. And, I mean, even people who are considered poor have cell phones, air conditioning, television.
Right. Well, there's a couple things that I could talk about there. One thing that you mentioned is obesity.
Yeah.
And income. And interestingly, I was talking to Dr. Greg Tomso the other day, and he's been doing research on food deserts. And the food desert isn't what you think it is. It's not like a barren wasteland of a plain out in Kansas.
Right.
It's actually areas where people in poverty who don't have adequate transportation do not have access to nutritious food.
Right.
So you might have limited amount of money and you have limited transportation. You're eating at the gas station.
Now, but if these folks really wanted arugula, wouldn't somebody go down there and sell it to them?
I don't know. Are you going to go sell it to them?
I'm not going to sell them anything. I see. Yeah, well, I guess...
It takes somebody who's willing to purchase good food at a good price and able to then go down there, set up a place that's convenient, and be able to sell it for a price that they can afford. I can't afford arugula. I can't even say it.
Yeah. But aren't the downtrodden to some extent responsible for that? I mean, isn't there better food available? And you don't have to have arugula, but there are better foods than Coke and potato chips that aren't necessarily all that expensive. Of course, if there's not an appetite for it, people are not going to be able to sell it.
I think that I don't know if we're on topic or not, but I think that fast food restaurants really are trying.
Yes, they are. They're being pressured to
offer better foods.
Yes.
However, better foods are more expensive, and so the cheapest food that you can buy is carbohydrates. Fatty foods.
Yeah.
So if an apple costs the same as a hamburger, you're going to buy a hamburger.
You're going to buy a hamburger.
Right.
Yeah. And that leads us off in another stray direction. Part of that is we subsidize the growth of corn. Corn turns into sugar, basically, so you can have high fructose corn syrup and all kinds of stuff cheaply. And, I see the government, to some extent, being responsible for it. Because now the government's kind of gone in the other direction with an ethanol mandate, which tends to raise the price of corn.
That's right.
Another huge error by the government in my distorted view of it is and maybe this is just too simplistic, is populism good or bad, or can you say, or does it depend?
Populism is a check. I think populism is a nice, healthy check on the balance.
Yeah.
So if income disparity gets too great, if there's too much corruption in government, it's a counterbalance. Because the people do have power. We do have a system of popular sovereignty. And if they are upset enough and they gather at the ballot box, we can see change.
But isn't there an element of just envy in income disparity? People wouldn't, if people weren't told about income disparity. I mean, if there weren't news stories or TV stories about, the rich are getting richer. The top 1% now has, more of the assets. If they weren't told it, they wouldn't know it. They wouldn't experience it in their lives. If, let's say you've got a very modest neighborhood and there's not much divergence in income. Bill Gates moves in. All of a sudden you've got enormous income disparity. So what? What's the harm?
What I would say is when I face my students in class and we start talking about the structure of our government and the way things work, it's really hard for me to cover chapters like Congress, chapters like the judiciary, because they look at the background of people who are there, and they can dream to be a Supreme Court justice. But the
Clarence
truth is,
Thomas is a Supreme Court justice. That's kind of a long story, but he grew up in abject poverty.
But the vast majority went to an Ivy League school.
Ivy
League kindergarten,
The
for that
Supreme
matter.
Court, you've got Yale, Harvard, and Kennedy went to Stanford, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which means, you know, Obama was real happy to create diversity with his appointments, but in a way, there isn't diversity.
There isn't diversity.
There isn't
So if
diversity
there is
in thinking.
That's right. If there's an
Yeah.
Ivy League, if you're born into a family that has a business that's successful.
Sandra Sotomayor was born into what? Lower middle class at best, right? Now, she got herself, as did President Obama. And President Obama didn't start out with any advantages and wound up
and we can
president.
start at the federal
Unfortunate
level.
for us, he wound up president.
Well, if we look local, if I tell these students, this is how you get a good job, this is how you earn a good living wage and be a success, that's really hard right now. There are no jobs. There aren't jobs for...
Maybe it is, but I think America is still full of success stories, people who started out without much, and because they got scholarships and they worked hard, and you know, maybe they got into Harvard because of well, they don't call it affirmative action anymore, but because of some kind of preference. Even so, there are people, and it's not hard to find them, who started out with nothing or started out in just the broad middle class and wound up at the top. Sandy Weil, the head of former head of Citigroup, said this. I don't know if it's true, but he said.
But we'll say it anyway.
But well, he said it. I know it's true that he said it.
Okay.
And he said 99% of the 1% used to be in the 99%. And maybe it's not strictly true, but if you move the percentages around, it's got to be kind of true.
Well, I think what resonates of the populist movement is it's not that populists, those who believe in this kind of message, don't believe in hard work. I think they do believe in hard work. I think that when populism resonates, it's because people think that hard work doesn't necessarily pay off. And so they're frustrated because they have tried to get the education, they've tried to get the jobs, they've tried to make a success of themselves, and the system is against them.
Well, yeah. But also there's a level of resentment by people who maybe didn't have the intelligence, didn't have the work ethic, you know. I mean, some of these people in Zuccotti Park who had signs, forgive all student loans, kill capitalism. It was just idiocy. Well, their college degree is in gender studies or something. You know, well, look in the phone book for an expert in gender studies. I mean, what? I guess you could teach gender studies to the next group of people coming up.
I'm just lucky to have a job. I don't in political science.
Well, but political science is something with more substance than any of these disciplines that end in the word studies.
Well, I think
you may not agree with that.
Seen,
you know a lot more about academe than I do.
Well, just watching government jobs, you know, I keep an eye on the backgrounds of those employed by the U.S. Congress, and I'll tell you that more and more and more of them have law degrees and master's degrees. You can't get a job on the Hill just by graduating with a political science degree and doing an internship. That's more and more rare. So I just think the market is getting saturated. It's much more competitive than it was.
So even if you've got and I certainly consider, but one of my kids is at FSU, and he's got a dual major in political science and philosophy, something I encouraged, because these are serious traditional disciplines. But if you graduate today with a degree in political science, the job market is pretty tough. You would know this.
I think some of it is the message that is being put out there, that these fields aren't preparing you for a job too.
Well,
I think
preparing you for law school.
Right, exactly.
That's what I've
encouraged. It's
encouraged
good grounding for law school, and I have employers who call me. When they have a job, they call me because they know our graduates can think and they can communicate orally and in writing. And I think that, so some of it's message, but regardless, a bad economy is making for a very saturated job market.
Are these students in political science because they want to go into politics, or just something they're interested in?
All kinds of things. I mean, I think people with a general interest in history, but focused on government, comparative governments, international relations, international studies, are attracted to political science. I think some of them want to go to law school. Some of them want to be teachers like me. You know, and then some of them want to be public servants. I think a lot of our politicians were political science majors.
Well, were they? Really?
Yeah, and those who work in public administration. So local government, city, state, county government.
Hired administrators.
Right.
And they know how
so civil servants, public officials, all of them have at least an interest in political science, if not a degree in it.
So is your message that kids with an interest in political science should not be discouraged and should come out here and sign up?
Like you said, these are centuries-old disciplines.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And they teach you the important skills that employers are looking for. Critical thinking, oral and written
So these
communication
employers
skills.
are in what? Just diverse white-collar jobs?
I think so. I mean, my brother graduated with a fine art degree. He's now vice president of a company. And when he looks to employ, yes, his company is a software company, but he can teach you how to program. What he wants to hire is somebody who can think outside of the box, someone who can communicate. So, you know, I think that it takes a different kind of thinking on the part.
We've diverged into this.
We have.
But certainly, if you're interested in getting a job. When I was a kid, all these Depression survivors who, you know, were lucky if they went to any high school said,
that's right.
Go to college, you'll get a job. Go to college, you'll get a job. That's not the only reason you should go to college. Certainly, but if you want to get a job, shouldn't you go into engineering, computer science, those kind of fields? I mean, isn't that where the jobs are?
We can only take so many engineers. I think we're pushing students into STEM disciplines, but the truth of the matter is we need lawyers.
I don't know. We got a lot of lawyers. This has been great. I appreciate you coming. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
This is Dr. Jocelyn Evans, the chair of the Department of Government at UWF. We'll be back next week with Dr. Elabash, who knows a lot about city finances. Good night.